Hey guys, Dave Curd here. I'm the broker of record with Lake City Realty, and I'm coming at you today to go over the 4 biggest reasons as a first-time home buyer that's going to put money in your pocket. These 4 techniques and tricks are going to make sure that you maximize the position you're in as a first-time home buyer. Tip 1, shared money from the government. This is up to you if you want to use this, because this is basically, you're going to get in bed with the government and the federal government when you're buying a house. What you could be doing when you're buying your home is you put 5% down, the government will match that with 5%. If you're buying new construction, that would actually apply from 10% and 10%, but let's just say resale. So if you put 5% of a house price down, the government would match 5%. So on a $300,000 house, you're saying, I'm going to jump in with $15,000. The government would say that they would put $15,000 as well. There's a couple different criteria. You have to make less than $120,000. You have to be buying a house for less than 4 times combined the total borrowing costs, as well as you have to meet those minimum down payment criteria. But at this point, if in the future your house went to $400,000, now the government would want their 5% of that revised version back in the future. Basically, it's a second mortgage with the property that you're tying yourself with the government of Canada. Why this is beneficial is if you're trying to lower your payments, well, now this is going to let you have $15,000 of less payments because it's interest-free money that you basically you're able to take out. So if you like the idea of having a slightly smaller payment on that mortgage, definitely look at that one to take advantage of. We're putting links to all these in the show notes, so take a look for that one in the show notes as well. Number 2, and the one you're going to be a fool if you're not taking advantage of, is the land transfer tax rebate. Some of these rebates you actually have to put the money out and then in the future you're going to get the money back. This isn't one of those. When you're closing on a property, if it's valued of $368,000 or less, you sign an affidavit that says, I'm a first-time home buyer, and you don't have to pay that first-time home buyer land transfer tax. This is a Sudbury version, so this is the Sudbury video because we don't have the municipal version of this, so we just have the provincial cost. Some cities do have that municipal cost, that local cost, and the provincial cost, so look into seeing what applies to you. But in Sudbury, you don't have to pay that up to $4,000 or a $368,000 home. You don't have to pay that land transfer tax. Just ask your lawyer about it on closing, and they'll make sure that that's going to be taken off just with you having to sign an affidavit. The third thing to take advantage of when buying your first-time home is going to be the RRSP first-time home buyers plan, they call it. Now, what is that? That's basically you're able to take up to $35,000 from your RRSP and take that money out and use that as your down payment to buy a home. It has to be in there for 90 days and there's a little bit of stipulation around that. But what's the advantage here? Like somebody would say, well, why don't I just take it out of my savings or something like that? And I'm always going to say preface this with talks to your expert, your financial planner, whatever that looks like. But what I've experienced, and again, preface this with everybody has a unique situation, but it's not the act of taking the $35,000 out, it's the act of putting the $35,000 in that you see your benefit. So if we break that down for a second, if say you've got $20,000 saved up to buy a house, more than likely you've been making decent money and maybe you've got contribution room left in your RRSPs. If you take that $20,000 and most of the time I deal with a young buyer, it's sitting in a TFSA or a high interest savings account. It's in one of those 2 places. So if you take that $20,000 from that TFSA or that high interest savings account and you move that to an RRSP, leave it in there for 90 days, you can take that out and buy your first home with it. Now, why do that? Well, if you're, say, a nurse making in a range of $70,000 a year, what you've done is you've lowered your taxable income by $20,000 for that tax year. That could be a big tax return, an increase of like maybe towards $6,000 or $8,000 at your tax time, depending on your tax bracket. So preface with talk to your financial planner about it, but it's not the act of putting the money out of your RRSPs, it's the act of putting it back in. Now, a few stipulations there. You have to put that money back in and it's not going to be counted towards your taxable income in those years. You need to put it back over 15 years, and if you don't, the government's going to be pretending that you've been taking that money out, and you'll have to start paying taxes on that money from at that time. But it's such an underrated used tool, and again, not the act of taking the money out, it's the act of putting the money in. So we're happy to chat with you a little bit more one-on-one, or you chat with your financial planner on that. But the fourth reason that the benefit as a first-time home buyer, save those receipts up, guys. So the amount of money you spend on transactional costs, so that's going to be things like moving expenses, lawyers, maybe prepping the home for sale, all these different costs. You can claim up to $5,000 of these expenses towards getting a rebate when you file your tax. That's going to be the first-time homebuyer tax credit, and that if you spent $5,000 on those costs, it would equate to a rebate of $750 at tax time. So that's one of those ones that you actually have to put the money out, and down the road you get a credit. But that's the fourth reason and the one to look at when you're buying your house. So I hope I was able to give you a little bit of value about some tools and tips to leverage those 4 first-time homebuyers techniques to put yourself in a position to have maximum money in your pocket. Thanks, guys. Like, review, share, and put a little check off that bell right next to subscribe, and we'll be notifying you whenever we put out content.